Hey guys, Will Levy here again. In part one of these program design presentations, the first one there I showed you was with a client who was suffering pretty severe low back pain. So now I'm going to show you that it's not just all the low level boring floor-based stuff. Show you some of the stuff that's usually a bit more enjoyable as a trainer, which is some more of the little bit of the higher end stuff. Or in fact, in this particular example I'll give you with an athlete, actually taking him from start 2 years ago, which was a lot of that very low level stuff, but show you how he's progressed through over the couple of years. So really quick bit of client background. So soccer player, started with him 2 years ago as an 18-year-old, very highly regarded young kid. He was the top pick in the country for an international trial, and that was the catalyst for getting him in to train with me. He was recommended to me. So we had a very short time to work with him initially. It was less than 3 months out from his trial until he was taking off to Europe. So we had a combination of, he was a kid who had never been in the gym before, never trained, but was a crazy skilled athlete. And he was in a rush to get some noticeable results. But at the same time, it was like, well, you're actually coming from a pretty long way back here. Now, a lot of trainers fall in the trap of thinking, well, he's a really good athlete, he's probably going to be really good in the gym as well. And this was a classic example that wasn't the case. He actually, he moved like crap, to be honest. And the good thing was, though, he was very open to receiving that. He realised that as I showed him examples of things. And so he was really diligent in doing his homework and working through. And 2 years later, he's come along in leaps and bounds and doing really, really well. So the goals for this kid was obviously to improve his performance, but a big one was, look, he was a very, very light, small-framed, pretty skinny kid, and as well as getting stronger and more explosive, he wanted to look more impressive on the football field, look more intimidating. So he wanted to add a bit of bulk about him. And I explained to him that in the early stages, honestly, that was all going to tie in with just getting stronger, but also eating a heap of food. So I'll just open this one up now. So this is a couple of years ago, and also understand here obviously what I know in terms of programming and training has progressed a lot over those couple of years, but here's where we started. So I won't go into as much this time about the actual mechanics of the exercises, but rather just why I chose what I chose. So some very old pictures here as well, but again, same preparation, foam rolling, some isolated mobility stuff into activation. So this guy's a soccer player. He was posture-wise, he was very much like you expect with any extension and rotation sport athlete. Extremely extension-based, right? Huge anterior tilt. Really, really stiff to the ankles. That's a commonality with soccer players. The other commonality with soccer players that I found is they tend to be very, very kyphotic. They've got very poor thoracic extension because they spend all day looking at a ball down at their feet, so they're always hunched over. Along with that, this kid was a student. He was 18 years old. He was just finishing off year 12. So all those postural issues were there. So day one, tested his glutes. Didn't know where his glutes were. I said, squeeze your glutes. He tried to squeeze, and I said, nah, that's your abs. Squeeze your glutes. Nah, that's your quads. Squeeze your glutes. Nah, that's your hamstrings. Squeeze everywhere, couldn't find his glutes. So that was pretty much our first session, was teaching him how to squeeze his glutes. And the great thing about training athletes is they do everything you tell them and then some. So he went away from the week, and by reports, he was out in the schoolyard cranking out glute bridges. Came back next week, alright, Will, I can do these glute bridges, I get it, cool. Bang, so we moved on. So the same principle behind this, the half kneeling stretch and the glute bridge combination. Also, I started off with the clams. I thought, again, if I'm going to build this kid from the ground up and treating him like I'm going to train him for the next 10 or 20 years, let's just really dial everything in. So we even took the time to go through those silly little clams and even the standing hip correction, just getting him standing on one leg and learning how to correct his pelvic alignment without hiking through QL as a compensation. Through just a mobilization, a standing mobilization, get a bit of hip flexor and the contralateral pec and anterior shoulder, combined with a front plank. This is a kid who, he came in saying he used to win at soccer practice the plank competitions. He could hold a plank for 10 minutes. And then I showed him how I wanted him to hold a plank, and 30 seconds smoked him. So there's a big difference between technique when things are done right and done incorrectly. And just in the upper body stuff, trying to get him to start opening up that lack of thoracic extension. So that's the same basic principle that we spoke about last time with the hips. We've got the antagonist relationship, or a force couple. So really tight hip flexors, really weak glutes, pair them up. Get that window of opportunity by stretching the hip flexors, then get into the glutes. Same thing down here when we're talking about the shoulder girdle. Right, open up those pecs, activate the movement pattern by, in this case we use a standing no money, which is basically just a standing shoulder external rotation with a bit of scap retraction, and then integrate that pattern into the bigger movement. In this case it was a rope face pull, right, which is pretty much like a high row. But the idea is there that we keep cycling through that. Stretch, activate, integrate. Right, so we inhibit that tight muscle, activate the smaller stuff from the movement pattern, and then use it in the bigger pattern. Then finishing with, basically here we actually put some mobilizers almost as an active rest in there, and some hip flexion. He had no hip flexion above 90 degrees, no hip flexion strength, so we had to get him on the ground and going through a sower's march. And as was my typical protocol then, and again it worked a treat, we did heaps of the hip flexor stretching glute bridge combo with the ankle mob. That was the bulk of it. With him, again, definitely didn't want to be stretching that low back, no lumbar rotational stretches for anybody, and definitely not the hamstrings for him. Again, this guy was in a wicked anterior tilt, right, really gross extension pattern. His hamstring was all you had to stop his lumbar spine going into hyperextension, stop him jamming those facet joints. Right, so we taught him to keep off those hamstrings. We might do some soft tissue work there, get him rolling on a hockey ball or something to help with the soft tissue quality, but you definitely didn't need to be trying to get any length in those hamstrings. So there's a really basic phase 1, and I believe this lasted about a week. 25th. Yep, so here we are a week later. Right, so some of these isolated stuff. Hip internal rotation was something that you'll find that soccer players are really lacking. So again, we started with some really isolated stuff there, and later on we make that more integrated. And here we start getting into more of an actual training program, and this is designed just by a group of sessions. I realized he was progressing quickly, so I wasn't going to block him in for like 4 weeks. It was more of a session based thing, and here we pretty much just increased the volume. So again, using that system of inhibit the tight muscle, activate the weak muscle, then use the weak muscle into that bigger pattern. In this case it's the kneeling deadlift, which I explained in that last one. It's that kind of interim exercise of the hip hinge pattern, going from the floor based glute bridge, but not going all the way to a deadlift, because that big movement of a deadlift was too far removed yet. Right, this is a guy who's only just learnt that he had muscles in his butt. So here we're basically reminding him, he's gone through the high volume of the glute bridges already, we don't need to do those anymore. This is just a little refresher. Just a short stretch this time, 15 seconds aside, just 6 quick glute bridges on the ground, saying yes, there's my glutes, yep, there's my glutes, cool, I know how to use them. Jump into the kneeling deadlift and use those glutes in the bigger pattern. And you can see we essentially doubled the volume over the course of, I believe at the time here I was training him just twice a week. That was usually the case through, that's most of the time of training has been twice a week. He's got a very busy training schedule with his soccer as well. So 2 times a week for somebody who's in season, and he's essentially in season year round, 2 times a week for strength training is more than adequate. But in those sessions we really want to get the volume up, because again these are pretty low level exercises. They weren't going to cause a heap of fatigue for him or a heap of soreness for a game day or anything. So a hip flexor mobilization, then into the standing hip corrections, which we used in phase 1. But now we're taking that smaller pattern just as just a rehearsal, just a practice before going into the bigger pattern. And in this case it was an offset dumbbell step up. The step up is another form of, for the most part, it's an unsupported single leg stance. There's a phase there where you're only standing on one leg. That's great for a soccer player because they're spending most of their time standing on one leg. Not just when they're running, but when they're kicking as well. They've got to really stabilize on that one leg to give themselves a powerful platform. So with the dumbbell step up, we put him on a flat bench, and I'll give him his height, so all the little notes on the side here, on a flat bench with 2 25 kilo plates. I did 2 things. A, that was the correct height for him. I put him at about 90 degrees of hip flexion. And it also gave him a stable surface to step from. At this gym that I was training over at the time, they didn't have any step up boxes or anything like that. And the bench is a bit squishy, which I didn't want him doing a step up on that. It was very unstable under his ankle, so the plates provided some stability, but it also worked out well for the height. And the offset loading I really liked for the step up because if we put that offset load, so imagine holding the dumbbell on the down leg side, that load is now pulling him to that medial side. So that up leg, the glute on that up leg, has to resist that internal rotation. Remember, the glute's an external rotator. So if we put an internal rotation force on it, it has to drive into external rotation, so we're going to get more glute activation out of it. And again, we just alternated our C series here. So we had a mob into a front plank, or on the Fridays it was a scapular push-up and a suitcase carry. And again, working through that shoulder girdle complex. Okay, and then just skipping over. So that was phase 1, phase 2. Skipping ahead to phase 4, and this is called year 1. This is 2 years ago. This was October through till around about December. Pretty sure this is December. Yeah, December 2010. And this was his last program before he took off. He was flying out to Europe straight after this. So we've skipped a phase here. There's all our isolated stuff. We've started getting into the single leg RDLs. Our movement-based stuff is much more integrated now in our mobility, doing things like Spider-Man lunges with an overhead reach, lateral squats and transverse squats. Okay, looking more like a normal strength training program now. So we still have that hip flexor stretch, right? That's just our inhibiting that tight muscle before we go into the big lift, which is a hip dominant pattern, a back box squat. So we had the bar on his back, got him to feel the heavy load on his back, relatively speaking, and I'm saying heavy here at this stage as a newbie. I would imagine I was probably loading him up at around about sort of 60 to 70%, right? Because we can still get really good strength gains there with somebody who's a novice. And just use the old 5x5 pattern here. It was a good volume for him, just basic linear progression. Right? Remember, a lot of people want to jump into the fancy stuff. Linear progression works, well, at least for newbies. Milk it for all it's worth, right? It's really simple. Use it while you can, because after linear progression stops working, it gets much more complicated. So don't miss that honeymoon period where you get to use linear progression. So this was literally just trying to add probably 2.5 kilo each week to his box squat. So that was his big lift. Then went into a barbell press. Now actually remember this, the barbell press didn't happen. I was just trying to use some of the old school strength exercises. Barbell press, nah, he didn't have the thoracic extension, and from memory we changed it to an angled bar press instead. And still to this day we don't press him overhead. He just can't quite. He's getting much better, but I'm still not comfortable taking him completely overhead, especially with the barbell. That was alternated with the chin up. So there's a press and a pull, real simple. Also 5 sets, this time just in the loading parameters. We kept those heavy sets of 5, but also one set where we just maxed out. And in this case, he came to me, he was he was very weak. I think he could do like 1 chin up. And so by this stage we worked up his strength, we could do a few more. So from memory, and there would have been notes in here to remind me where we're at, this was all variations of assisted pull-ups. Or it might have been that by now he could do 5 pull-ups at body weight, and to get max, I might have helped him, maybe taking a certain amount of body weight off him. Barbell split squat. These days I've moved away from the barbell split squat. I found we can load people up with a goblet position forever. So I'd like to keep it there for as long as I can. But barbell split squat, again, we kept the reps the same. Our variable that we're changing was the load, and we just alternated that with a push-up. So we had that, just a basic lower upper body split there, and the push-ups were just going for max reps. So that was our variable that we're training there, was repetitions. So you can see in that first one we've got a big movement, big lower body movement, hip dominant pattern, the back box squat. We've got a vertical press, a vertical pull, a single leg stance movement, and a horizontal press. Now that is more pressing than pulling, and we typically want more pulling in this, but 2 things. A, he does have a lot more pulling in his warm-up, but also in his session B, we changed that emphasis. So his big lift now was a barbell deadlift from a low peg. Essentially, that's a rack pull. Again, just a 5x5 pattern. A single arm bench press. So that's one of the first progressions often used for an open chain press after push-ups. He has to work on that stability first with doing that one arm press. So it's a lot more self-limiting. Neutral grip pull-up. So just a different grip going from chin up to pull-up. So underhand grip to a neutral grip, same loading parameter. So there's another pull. A step up, as I talked about the step up before, which this time we're up to a barbell. The barbell just being on top of that long lever adds a lot more stability demand, and these worked really, really well for him. And then ring rows. Now we've got the horizontal pull. So on this day, it's much more pull dominant than push dominant. So that's where we got to in a pretty short period of time. Now, for a guy that came in, as I said, very weak, very, very new to training, and wanted to get a lot of results fast. We did really well. He did really well. He was the one who stuck to the program getting there, but I was very happy with where we got into in that stage. And at this point, he took off to Europe, and it ends up that I see him again in a couple of months, and we'll get to that one next.